Again, good evening. We're not going to repeat all the welcome greetings, and my role is to introduce you into the atmosphere, this movie that we're going to deal with now with the panel. And I think that some of the things I'm going to say are quite familiar, so I'm going to say them quickly and reach the point at the end of the presentation. You know it all. It all started from a guy in Tunisia who felt frustrated. He couldn't really do things, wanted to burn himself up because he couldn't see a way out of his terrible situation, and he set fire on the entire Middle East, which was then called the Arab Spring. A real significant group of people, some of them young, who had no capability to actually do things and to reach the heights they wanted to get to. They realized this is the time for them to bring about change. And one of the things that really helped them was this new technology that people underestimate. But I tell you, it's very serious. It's the new media that can recruit people all of a sudden, gives them the opportunity to express their views and ideas and to recruit others for the benefit of change. So this change comes about. A lot of those regimes that exert force against their publics, and through that force they govern them. These regimes begin to collapse like a domino. And you know some of these places, and some sort of a feeling is that there's something new and significant that everybody calls the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring also creates an opportunity to go towards democracy and to go towards elections. It also raises the idea that you can elect your own leaders to represent you. But what did they get as a result of these elections? In most of these places, they got the political Islam, especially the Muslim brothers who were ready for this event. They sat quietly, they waited for an opportunity, and they took it immediately, big time. And from the Arab Spring, we get to a situation of an Arab winter, because very quickly we saw that those people who stood aside and made promises, and by the way, they also invested a lot in the population, a lot of good ideas, but when they came to power, they started, power became, as usual, power corrupts, and they are harsher with the public than the ones before them. And then in this very short period, which is called the Arab Winter, and that was the second chapter. But it didn't end with that, and now we come to chapter 3. Because on this platform of frustration and the attempt to change something and to bring about something else, we see the radical Islam growing. It was always there, but now it gets a much more legitimacy, let's say, to break through. By the way, everything with a lot of currents that exist for years of separation of religion versus state, all the religious and tribal currents, they get like a picture of local communities of distribution, that they do not accept the Middle East as they were told to 100 years before. So all these currents actually now break through, and all of a sudden, this idea of the radical Islam starts appealing to people, because nothing else does. And this is the power. People are very impressed by power, by force, by people like to join a factor, a winning factor. They like to ride on success. And the methods are very harsh measures. By the way, the idea is to instill an Islamic caliphate from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean on all the Arab Muslim area, to go back to the golden era of Islam, and to create something new that can give a response to the interests of the Sunni and Salafistic Muslims. It started with the ISIL, then it became ISIS, and now they call it IS, or Daesh as they call it. And the idea began to attract more and more people, not just within the Arab world, but also we see in other places as well, in Europe, You remember the events of even last night in Denmark and before that in France, because the idea is to recruit people, to mobilize people, and all you need is just to express your loyalty to the organization, and then you're part of it. And if you are loyal, then after a certain time, they tell you, please take a plane, go to Istanbul. By the way, Istanbul is the city which has the greatest movement of passengers. I don't know if in the world, but definitely in Europe and Middle East. Somebody's going to wait for you. All your expenses will be covered. You land in Istanbul, you take a car, and you go to some training camp. And if you're good at beheading the heads of cattle, then you can be sent to the front in Iraq and Syria. And then this frustrated guy, that the family never, he's despaired of life, he's despaired of the future. He can actually become with a lot of ecstasy, and he trespasses all the borders of humankind. He can kill, he can murder, he can chop head offs, he can do all the terrible things. He doesn't have to wait for the 72 virgins to wait for him in paradise. And what's surprising about all this is that more and more people are attracted to this idea, because in this idea there's also some logic behind it. And the logic that they say to the people is that we, the greatest Arab Muslim nation, it cannot be that we do not share equally all the resources that we have. How can it be that a state or a small Gulf country that has oil, only the royal family can benefit from it? This is an asset of the Arab Muslim Sunni nation, not the Shiite, of course. And therefore, if we conquer, if we create this caliphate, this empire, we are going to allocate equally all the resources and we'll give it to the entire public. The world actually, that until that moment was sort of standing aside, was looking at the events of the Middle East, could have made a statement. Maybe some people would say, it's not so bad. The bad guys are killing the bad guys. What can we do? We don't have a solution. Why shouldn't we intervene? Because you intervene, then you become responsible. We will stand aside and look at what's happening there. But this world actually decided at a certain point that it has to intervene. When they start chopping off the heads of Western journalists. All of a sudden, it's in our backyard. And then there's a coalition created, led by the United States, and the role of that coalition is to stop this dispersion of the Islam State and to conquer it and to win over it. And the coalition is that the people who contribute according to their modest capability. It's usually from air attacks, it's not focused enough, it's not massive, there's no critical mass, and they're not ready in any case to put the boots on the ground. We have a feeling that maybe the effort of the Islamic State has been stopped, but that's not the picture, we think at least. They understand what's going on, they know what's happening, and they adjust themselves very quickly to changes. And then they decide to deepen their hold in the places that they're already there, that is in Iraq and Syria, that they could have took control very quickly, and they take care of the population and they create more supporters. Together with that, they also continue to cause that more people will join, and all of a sudden we see various organizations in the Middle East, Muslim, Salafist, jihadist, who express their loyalty to the great Caliph al-Baghdadi and to ISIS. And this is the result that we see happening here and now. The attitude to the intervention is, by the way, these are caricatures that come out of the media in the Arab world. How do they perceive the effort of the West against the IS? And now we come to a second factor, and they also think strategically. Up to now, we said, he has to speak into the microphone because we can't hear him. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. Thank you. I tried to move a little bit, yeah, but we can't hear him. Iran immediately takes care of this opportunity to create its hegemony. And because the West is terrified from boots on the ground against ISIS, the Iranians decide to create those land militias. And they are the boots on the ground. They're going to fight against the evil forces of the IS. But in this way, they also create strongholds all over the Middle East, the Iranians, because Iran is now creating forces that actually will serve its own hegemony in the Middle East on the day after. Now, the West, led by the United States, and we'll talk about it a lot in the conference, they are negotiating with Iran about its nuclear plan. How do you prevent Iran from becoming nuclear? But on the other hand, to deal with Iran as an ally, maybe the word is too harsh. We don't like it. Maybe a partner. You know that in military terms, you say deconfliction. That's like dispersing the impact zones. Now we talk to those same Irans that we talk to them about nuclear. Now we talk to them how to cope with the ISIL. And of course, it has an impact on Chapter 1, because when you talk about Chapter 1, you think about Chapter 2. And we see an amazing phenomenon here, that the problem becomes a solution. First of all, you remember Saudi Arabia, which is now part of the coalition, it poured money and activists and ideas to all these jihadist Islamic bodies. Now it fights them. Iran is the main problem and creates most of the problems in the Middle East. All of a sudden becomes part of the solution against ISIS.
If you even take Hezbollah as an example, and when the Iranians were very upset with them for bringing the war into Syria, now they are perceived in Lebanon actually as the response, the solution against the Islamists and the Salafi, because there's no one else who can protect it. And we can see a very interesting phenomenon there. The same problem in many places becomes the solution. Of course, it's not a good solution for us. The Iranians are the boots on the ground. We have Soleimani, who is the head of the Quds force, and his general was a month ago in Golan Heights. They continue to walk around the Golan Heights over the last week or so, in the last weekend even. They are heading a campaign side by side with Assad, and by the way, Assad himself from this problem became a solution against the Islamist organizations in southern Syria. And we see them in more and more places, and they are no longer ashamed to take their own pictures and to show their faces, because they have become the solution. Now, it's an intricate problem. I don't want to go into it. There's not enough time. It all has to do with the other. One thing has to do with the other. You push in one place, you get a reaction somewhere else. There's no end to this. And everyone is in awe, and nobody knows what to do. And then they come to us, to Israel, this small country, and someone called it a villa in the jungle. And we believed we were a villa in the jungle. And we thought that maybe if we protect ourselves, and we have an iron dome and an iron wall and an iron... so we'll be able to get away from these situations, and we'll be able to stand by. And we called it the standoff. We wanted to be on the sidelines. We didn't want to be involved in what is happening. We only wanted to take action if there are threats, imminent, immediate threats to Israel. At most of the time, we wanted to be disconnected. We are in the Middle East, but we think we are somewhere else. And it worked well, perhaps, until about a year ago. Because last year, something changed. Because part of these events started to come home to us. And you know what happened in Gaza, and why we started with Protective Edge. And by the way, for Hamas, it is enough not to be beaten, not to be defeated, and they already say that they are victorious. And we always look and see what we did, and we ask ourselves whether we were okay. We never think of the other implications that may be for such moves, like those who have thought perhaps we should control the Gaza Strip and eliminate Hamas. And suddenly we see events surrounding the Temple Mount, and we see that people want to be go against Haram Sharif, and we see all sorts of terrorism, the single human terrorism. People are calling them lone wolves, those men who get all of their instructions from the internet. They are told exactly what to do and how to do, and by the way, they are attracted by all sorts of computer and video games. And these people wake up one morning and they feel frustrated by something in their lives. They don't like something. An author speaks in Denmark about how you can or cannot write about the Prophet Muhammad, so we can go and shoot people in a cafe. And it's not just there, it's here as well. And suddenly we see that our entire policy, which is our standoff policy and of maintaining the status quo. Last night we had a meeting, a few people got together and we talked about this issue, that this policy is no longer valid and Israel needs to change direction. Israel all of a sudden is finding itself facing these jihadist forces on its borders, because in Sinai, is part of ISIS, and it's in Sinai, it's on our Egyptian border, and the Egyptians are not able to cope with it. The same is true for the Golan Heights. We also have jihadists and Islamists on one hand, and also those front organizations in Lebanon. And so now we have the Iranis, in fact, through Iran, through Iraq, and Syria and Lebanon, they have extensions also on the Golan Heights. So they're not just there. It's not only to defend Assad, it's also to create a platform that can be used in future against Israel. Israel now needs to decide. Is it going to continue with a standoff policy, being distant, or putting together a new policy? It's very difficult for it to put together a new policy, and the president said so himself. We are used to having people responsible. We are used to the same game of the globe, of all sorts of international standards, and we need order. It's very difficult for us, all this anomaly and all this chaos. We call it fauda, or it's called fauda, and therefore it's very difficult for us to put together the right solution. We have not created the concepts and the strategies and the operative concepts yet, and each player has something different to say, and one day they can be your rival, the next day they can be your friend, and they are also affected from the family level to the national level, what is stronger, what is weaker, and this really is a very complicated situation. And we think in the Institute, in light of work that has been carried out, that Israel and the next government that will be established after the elections needs to change its course, needs to be more proactive. They need to actually recalculate their route vis-à-vis the Palestinians. We'll talk about it in tomorrow's conference, vis-à-vis the northern arena. And we also have a special interest in cooperation with the peace countries, with Egypt and Jordan, because on the face of it, it all looks great with Jordan and with Egypt. But I can tell you that even due to all sorts of aspects, some people know about this more than I do, all sorts of regulatory aspects, when we talk about gas, etc., we have finally managed to convince the Jordanians that we can be their backup in terms of energy in order to re-strengthen our ties with them, because we really want to put together this sort of alliance. Now they have lost our trust as well, that we will again be able to provide them the fruits of peace, because we have not been able to do so until now. And Egypt as well, even though we have some common interests, we don't really have such common interests, because the Egyptians don't want to see Hamas in Gaza, and Israel is afraid of the other alternatives there are in Gaza, because we feel they're not even better, they are even worse. So we really have to consolidate a new policy looking towards our alliance with the peace countries and strengthening it. Many are talking about this, and there's great discourse in Israel. There are even generals in favor of regional cooperation. This regional cooperation is all very good and well. It's very nice. But in order to have a regional cooperation, 3 conditions must be met. The first condition is a true political peace process with the Palestinians. Israel needs to prove that it really wants to reach an agreement. The second thing, something Israel has not done to date. It has not been clear about the Saudi initiative that has become the Arab initiative. Israel has to say something clear about this. And the third thing, and I don't know why, we are taking our strategic ally, and instead of being completely strategically coordinated with it, fully and completely, we are challenging one another vis-a-vis the changes that are happening in this area. Without these three conditions, it is impossible for anything to be happening on the regional level, and therefore the main idea we're placing on the table is one of an initiative in all arenas and channels possible. An initiative that creates movement, and this movement will create opportunities. When you're at a standstill, and when you believe that status quo is sustainable, when it is not, and then events come to us. When we initiate, when we are proactive, we will influence events. Of course, not everything, but we will have more cards in our hand in order to position ourselves in a better and more convenient reality. Thank you very much.